fundamentally, if you're doing something that you're good at and you enjoy, then it's obvious, right? And at a certain point, a lot of founders experience this sense of dread of coming into work in the morning, which is kind of normal to a certain extent, but maybe once it sort of exceeds a certain limit, that's the time when you probably need to start thinking about stepping away and finding someone else.
Welcome to the Startup CEO Succession Podcast, where we dive in deep into the pivotal journey of founder CEOs navigating the critical decision. Should you continue leading your business or bring in a new leader? I'm your host, Evgeny Shadchnev. And in each episode, we will examine the challenges, strategies, and success stories of leadership transitions in the startup world. Whether you're a founder considering your next move, a professional CEO ready to take over, or an investor navigating the process, join us as we uncover insights that will help you steer your company towards a successful future. Today, I'm speaking with Adam Fudakowski, founder of Switchee. Switchee, founded in 2015, helps social housing landlords to offer a better rental experience to their tenants by offering insights and tools that enable the landlords to proactively manage their homes. In 2020, 5 years after Switchee was founded, following a tragic loss of his co-founder Ian, Adam hired an external CEO, Tom Robbins, who we will meet in a future episode. We can say with confidence, 4 years later, that this handover was a success. The company has done incredibly well in the last 4 years. In our conversation today, Adam and I will discuss the events that led to the CEO change, how he navigated the conversation with the board and what he would have done differently, what it's like to work with Tom now that Adam reports to Tom and not the other way around, and the lessons that Adam has to offer to other founders who find themselves in a similar situation as he was just 5 years ago. Enjoy the conversation. Hello, Adam. Thank you so much for joining me for our conversation today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Adam, let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us about the founding story of Switchee?
Switchee is actually my second company. I started life as an engineer, studied at Cambridge University, and then I left to join BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, for a couple of years, which I enjoyed, but I really had this kind of hankering for running my own business. I think essentially I just hated having a boss. I've always thought about myself as a serial entrepreneur. So I've always, like, since the beginning, since leaving BCG, I had this kind of vision that I was going to start and grow a few different companies. And I always kind of felt like the early stage was where I was going to be most effective. If there was one thing that I learned from that first business, it's that it's like a really tough journey and that you don't want to do it alone. You definitely need to find a co-founder for this journey. So then I went out looking for and I found Ian, who I started the business with.
What does the company do?
Yeah, so the company is focused on improving the lives of people living in rented homes. So we have technology that essentially allows big landlords to understand how their properties are performing. We've got about 140 customers at the moment. Our current customers own about 3 million homes. We're about 100 people as a business. We're Series B stage, and we've been going for almost 10 years now.
Yeah. So you founded the company 10 years ago, but you're not running it anymore.
That's right. When I started Switchee, I brought on board my co-founder Ian within about 2 or 3 months of starting it. And I took care of the kind of technical side of the business, and I was CEO as well, at least in name. And then he took over more of the commercial side of the business. He was chief commercial officer. And we ran the business very effectively as a kind of double act, really. I mean, I did have the CEO title, but it was much more of a partnership relationship than it was like a classic kind of chief executive relationship. We were certainly peers, he was not my subordinate in any way, shape or form. We were partners. And we worked very, very effectively together for 5 years. Ian was actually the best person I'd ever worked with. at the time by a long way, I would say. So Ian and I worked together for first couple of years, and then a couple of sort of weird things happened. Like there were a couple of meetings, that important client meetings, that Ian just didn't turn up to. Like we were scheduled to meet a client, I was there, and he just wasn't there at like 9 a.m. And it happened a couple of times. And I challenged him on it, and I was like, look, that was really weird. How this is two meetings you haven't turned up to. And he confided in me at that point that he has a bout of depression. So he confided in me he had depression, but he had all sorts of kind of techniques for managing it. He'd had it since he got to university, and I didn't really know much about depression at the time, but I essentially said something along the lines of, "It's no big deal. It hasn't affected our working relationship to date, and just turn up to the meetings and it'll be fine. Like I really enjoy working with you." And he was like, "Yeah, that's great. That's cool." And I didn't think a lot more of it, to be honest, because things improved again, and he was always there. And again, as I said, was the best person I'd ever worked with. So he could essentially do no wrong. And then 2 years after that, so sort of 4 years into working with him, we were raising our second round of funding, and Ian just kind of fell into this very depressive hole that he wasn't able to get himself out of. And so we discussed what to do, and we decided together that he would take some time off, because he sort of bounced in and out of the business a bit, like taking 2-3 days off here and there, but very kind of unexpectedly, which was disruptive. But so we decided he would take a block of time out. He went to go and stay with his sister in Kentucky, and we were talking pretty much every day, and he seemed to be making a solid recovery. He was getting professional help. He was on medication and stuff. And then I think about a couple of months passed, and we were talking about him coming back to work. And I remember he said, like, "Adam, I'm not going to feel better until I'm back at work. Like my work is a key part of me feeling like I'm functioning properly." And I said, "Yeah, I get that, but I just want to make sure that you're not going to bounce in and out, because that's more disruptive for the business than it is helpful." And he kind of agreed with that. Anyway, another week or two passed, and he was getting ready to come back, and then one morning I got a phone call from a number that I didn't recognize, and it was Ian's father, who I'd never spoken to before, and he told me that Ian had killed himself the night before. Which I think, like knowing Ian and having spoken to him every day, must have just happened in a incredibly dark moment that he had, right? Because he wasn't like that. He wasn't sort of suicidal or close to suicidal when I spoke to him. I didn't get that I never got that sense. And so this his death by suicide came as a complete shock, and I had no sense that it was even a risk when it happened. And I behave quite differently around friends who I think are going through struggles now. And I know now that it's never bad to ask people quite direct questions about whether they're thinking about these kind of things. So you might worry that asking somebody whether they're thinking about suicide might actually push them towards suicide, but the research says otherwise. Like you basically, by asking the question, you never make it worse. And by asking the question sensitively, you can get somebody to kind of talk about where they're at in their thought process, and be able to kind of assess whether you can do something to help them as a friend or not. So I'm certainly much more aware of that now than I was before. What was interesting was that the whole team really kind of rallied and said, like, actually this business is Ian's legacy. Like we need to come together and and build this in his memory. That got us through that first like horrible 6 months after Ian had died. At which point I think the business could easily have sort of fallen apart.
Yes, I'm really, really sorry to hear about. And it sounds like it was a big shock for the business on the one hand, but also it galvanized the entire team around delivering the mission and making it work for Ian's memory.
It did, yeah. I mean, that period after Ian died was obviously incredibly painful. I was looking for somebody to come into the business to fill this huge hole that Ian had left. This guy called Tom Robbins, had applied for a COO role, and kind of immediately looking at his CV, I knew that we weren't going to be able to afford him. It sort of wasn't within spec, but I thought like this person's got a really interesting profile, and like I would love to work with them. Eventually, after much discussion, Tom actually came in as head of strategy for the business. Even before he had joined, we'd already had discussions about him taking over as chief exec, although it wasn't public, and the team were not aware of that at the time.
So it sounds like a few things happened at the same time. On the one hand, you realize that being a founder is just too much to do it alone, and you want to work with someone else. And when you met Tom, you also realized that he has a very interesting profile, and maybe he could become a chief executive at some point in the future.
That's right. Yeah.
And how did you get your board involved in this process?
The board, like after Ian died, I think the board's expectations were kind of so low that they were sort of happy that we were still alive more than anything else. So when I came and proposed hiring Tom, there wasn't a lot of resistance at that point to hiring him, because there was clearly a kind of big gap left by Ian, and I was very clear that I needed help and a partner in the business. So it wasn't difficult to get them to agree to recruiting him as a head of strategy. But I was already kind of open at that point with the board that he might be a candidate for chief exec in the future. And the board was kind of split on that. There was a couple of people that were really pro that idea, and a couple of people that were really skeptical about that transition.
Skeptical about Tom as a potential candidate, or skeptical about the idea of you stepping down and moving away in principle?
I think it was more the latter. It was more that they were worried about me stepping down than it was about Tom's capabilities. I guess it was just a kind of like, we know who Adam is, and Adam's proposing a change to an unknown party, and we're not convinced yet.
Yeah. And how did you navigate it?
Well, it was a kind of timing thing. So Tom joined, and he immediately attended the board meetings and just showed himself to be very credible at the board. It didn't take long for those other board members that were skeptical to feel comfortable about that as a potential transition. And then I can't remember the exact timings, but I think it was either 6 or 9 months later that Tom took over as chief exec.
And you were, if I remember correctly, you were fundraising at the same time.
I did that funding round without Tom in the business, and so we had money in the bank. We closed that funding round, and then Tom joined pretty much immediately after that fundraise was completed. The new investor was not aware of that proposed transition, but we did tell them that we were hiring a head of strategy. It wasn't a done deal at that point. Like, Tom was joining the business, but he wasn't becoming chief exec straight away. And we knew that we had to get that new investor who'd literally just joined the board to be comfortable with that transition as well. But they basically got a try before you buy period, right? So we ran side by side, Tom taking on more responsibilities and doing a lot of the commercial stuff. Like I said, it didn't take that long for everyone to feel comfortable and know that the transition would be successful, or at least not be totally worried about it. Like it wasn't a kind of leap into the unknown at that point.
And what was the moment or the trigger for the decision to make it official and promote Tom?
I don't remember a specific trigger for him becoming chief exec, but at a certain point it was kind of obvious that he was going to make a great chief exec. And then we worked on that transition plan. It was just that he performed as expected. In fact, he exceeded a lot of expectations, and it became very clear that he was going to make a better chief exec than me.
Yeah. And what were the things that you did in order to make it successful?
I'd been kind of flat out in the business for 5 years at that point. One of the things that Tom suggested that I'm very grateful for was that I should take a bit of time off. He was not chief exec at this point, so he was still head of strategy. I took 3 months out of the business where I basically switched off completely. I deputized to Tom, so Tom was kind of acting CEO at this point, and we had a weekly call. That was it. Other than that, I was just like doing stuff with my family and some DIY projects and doing a bit of traveling. He did great, and shortly after I came back, we made the title switch. But that time off also, I mean, I think it obviously gave Tom the space to not have me breathing down his neck, but also gave me the space to sort of re-energize myself and think about what was next, what I wanted to do next. If you've been chief exec for a while, there's your day-to-day, and you sort of need to drop it all and then reinvent yourself. You need to come up with a different role. Like if you end up stepping back into even if you don't have the title, if you end up stepping back into the same roles as you had before, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. Like you need to make sure that you're not doing the same stuff as you were before.
Yeah. And what was your next role?
So I had 3 main points of focus. So fundraising for the next round was primary concern, and I basically spent the next year doing that on and off. But then also international expansion and M&A stuff, and some kind of product skunk work stuff. But absolutely not running the day-to-day business. So I had no executive control over decision making for, who we hired, where we used the money, the vision for the business. That was all Tom's remit.
And what was your official title at this point?
So we had quite a long debate over this. I took the executive chairman title, which I feel was a bit of a misnomer because it wasn't like I wasn't being an executive chairman particularly, but that was mainly just to allow me to be credible in front of investors. Like, investors still want to know they're speaking to the top person. So I held that for 2.5 years, and then I hired in an actual chairman, and I then stepped back into a founder director role.
I'm really curious, how did your working relationship with Tom evolve after you stepped down? Because prior to this, he was reporting into you.
Yeah.
Then he became the chief executive. How did the working dynamic between you change?
So my working relationship with Tom has always been good, but it's very different to the one that I had with Ian. My relationship with Ian was much more of a kind of almost like kind of brothers in arms, dynamic duo type relationship. It was almost like we were kind of fighting a war together or something, right? I don't know what the right analogy was, but we had each other's backs. It was very much like a very close relationship. And my relationship with Tom is great, but it's much more professional. We don't kind of hang out outside of work, but he's incredibly good at his job. I report into him as well. I mean, that's the big difference, which is absolutely the right thing. I think that's quite hard. That bit is tough for, I talked about the reason I left BCG is because I hated having a boss, right? So even the idea of reporting into someone is challenging for me, honestly. But the relationship is sufficiently good that I I don't feel like I have a boss particularly, even though Tom is a fantastic manager in that sense. So he's very good like that. But that is like, apart from anything else, like even on the ego front, like having a boss is a challenge if you've left your company specifically to be an entrepreneur and not have a boss.
And speaking of the senior team, what was the impact on the senior team of the CEO's succession?
So initially, I kept the circle of people who are aware of this transition pretty tight. So it wasn't like the senior leadership team were not aware of the fact that Tom could become a chief exec as soon as he was hired. It was a bit of a gradual process. It was pretty tricky, if I'm honest, because I had people on my senior leadership team who were looking to try and step up to various roles, and then I basically hired Tom in over the top of them. And that was particularly tricky with the commercial team, but it was also tricky for the COO that we promoted internally, both of whom were like not entirely sure what this person's remit was or what they were going to be doing. And I was also probably not being like totally transparent about what was going on either. That was tough. I think, once they started working with him, it was much easier. If you'd like to be able to promote someone internally, but they're just not ready for it, and you hire someone in above them, maybe that person's even applied for their job and not got it, then that's always going to be a tricky relationship, and it really depends on how you kick it off as to whether it's a success or not. But I think, after a few weeks, all the people who were then reporting into Tom felt like they could learn a lot from him, and so there was a lot less uncertainty and anxiety once he got into the business. But I must say it was pretty tough for a few weeks.
And in hindsight, do you sense that maybe some of the senior team have figured out that he might become a new chief executive? Or you managed to keep it under wraps?
I'm sure it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. I don't think the junior team members got that necessarily, but I think at the SLT, it would have been fairly obvious, I should think. Yeah.
And when you think about the entire organization, now with the benefit of hindsight, 4 years on, what was the impact on the company now that Tom has been chief executive since 2020?
I mean, immeasurable. Our company has doubled in size every year for the past 7 years, except for that COVID year where we had a flat year. So every year, everything's got twice as big. And that, I was kind of able to manage that early stage and to go from kind of 0 to 1. But I would not have been capable of taking us on that scaling journey. Definitely not on my own. And Tom has done it like 3 or 4 times already. Not in a chief exec capacity, but he has been in scale ups for most of his career. He's got great instinct on, how to resource the teams. He's a much better leader for an organization of this size. Basically, the business wouldn't be here where it is without Tom. And I'm really clear on that. So I'm very grateful for him coming into the business. And one of my investors said to me that it was the best decision I'd ever made, was bringing in Tom. So it's a compliment, but it also feels like we don't think you could have done it on your own. And he's right. I would like to feel like I could have done the whole thing on my own, but the reality is that I couldn't. And I think I've got an important but specific skill set, the sort of product market fit person. Are you somebody who can make something out of nothing and find a few people to buy it? And I'm not the person who's going to design a great org chart or, to put all the kind of skills and resources in to scale up to 150 people. I think what's been really nice is that even after that transition, there's been plenty of space for me to operate in the business that I started. But I'm pretty glad to not be doing the chief exec role.
So it sounds like these are 2 very different skill sets. A founder's skill set, finding product market fit, going from 0 to 1, what you've done brilliantly to get the company off the ground. And the CEO skill set, creating the org chart, running the machine that scales the business, and making sure that it doubles every year, as Switchee has been doing.
100%. A CEO has three jobs. Find the right people, make sure you're sufficiently resourced money-wise, and set the vision and mission. Right. Those three things don't apply on day one. Like, they don't apply for the first 2 or 3 years. If that's what a CEO does, you're not a CEO
You're
for
a
the
founder.
first 3 years. You're a founder, yeah.
And Adam, let's go back to the point when you hired Tom. It sounds like he worked out brilliantly as the CEO. And yet, it's almost like you got lucky, if I may say so, by hiring him. He applied for a CEO job, and you had a coffee, and you had the sense that he might be a good fit for the company for the future. But you did not run an executive search process. You did not sit down to write a comprehensive job spec for the new chief executive.
No. The situation that I ended up in is very specific. I'm not recommending having your co-founder die as a transition mechanism, right? Even before Ian died, my feeling as an entrepreneur, right, is that my job is to do myself out of a job. Like, that's always been my notion, that if I could kind of hire somebody to do what I was doing, that was great. And so I've always been sort of questioning, am I adding value to this business, or should I go on and do the next thing? And I happen to have stuck around for 10 years, but I didn't think I was going to do that. And almost like every year I'm thinking, I'm like a year and a half or 2 years away from stepping away. Quite early into the journey, like maybe 3 or 4 years in, I remember saying to Ian, I was like, look, I'm probably not going to be around here for forever. And I think the business is getting to a stage where maybe it doesn't need me. And I think he was kind of fine with it. And then I had the same conversation with the board. I'm thinking that I might try and recruit someone else to take my job, again, while Ian was still alive. And I think in retrospect, that was a mistake. Basically, that destabilized my relationship with the board members. And I remember one of the board members saying something like, it's very difficult to not take into account the stuff you said to us about leaving with my consideration on this other decision, like the cat's out of the bag, you're leaving now, kind of thing. And I'd obviously managed that news really badly. Like, I shouldn't have said I'm thinking of leaving. It should have been much more like, I'm not leaving, but I see part of my role as creating a business that can survive without me. So I'd like to be open with you in that process, but I'm not leaving.
So it sounds like with the benefit of hindsight, you would have communicated it with maybe a bit more finesse, communicating your intention not to stay around as a CEO forever, but at the same time, really reassuring investors that you're not going away, you still very much believe in the company as you do, and just giving them reassurance.
Yeah, that's right. I think I had a lot of naivety because I'd always sort of felt like I was going to leave at some point, right? I wasn't going to be around for 30 years. That's not my DNA. And so it was just me being mature as a leader, having this kind of open conversation with my board. But as I said, I definitely misjudged that. It took quite a long time to rebuild that trust with them. And as I say, I've been around for 10 years now, but that feeling hasn't gone away. I'm always sort of thinking, am I still adding value here? Which I don't think is a bad instinct. Like, it's just, it can be destabilizing.
So it sounds like it's a very honest question to ask ourselves and also raise with the board, but how it's done also matters greatly, because as you've said, it's very easy to destabilize the relationship, give a wrong impression, and then take years to repair the trust.
I agree. Yeah. I think that the majority of the other stuff kind of worked out kind of well. Tom has been very good and understanding about giving me space to operate as well. So I appreciate that. I think the role of the incoming CEO is a really tough one, particularly if the founder is hanging around in any capacity. Like, no one wants to feel like they've got someone looking over their shoulder, or if they screw up, then someone is ready to take back over, or anything like that. So I think he's been very good and understanding about that. And I think much of the successes that we've seen over the last few years are down to Tom and also obviously our whole team. I feel like he's good at giving me credit for the foundations of Switchee and some of the culture and stuff.
You and Tom built a really good working relationship without stepping on each other's toes and navigating the shift of responsibilities. First, Tom reporting into you, now you reporting into Tom. What helped you to build a really good working relationship that kept evolving really well over the years?
Well, I think first of all, Tom is a great person to work for. So,
Well, so are you, I'm sure.
well, I'm not sure if that. I mean, Tom has much better leadership skills than I do. He's a natural coach and very encouraging, and my way of working is more kind of problem solving and individual, and I think I'm talented at that. But when it comes to kind of bringing a team together and getting the team singing, I think Tom is really good at that more generally. But we have this policy of radical candor in the business, and one of the kind of key tenets of that is this idea that you need to be both compassionate and brutally honest. So having that ability to have a very frank conversation with somebody and tell them how things are going, I think has been really important for the healthy growth of the business, but also relationship with Tom. So, assuming positive intent and challenging and truth seeking, so trying to figure out what the root cause of a problem is, and being compassionate and being mindful about the other person's position. All of those things, which are all kind of key Switchee values, have in fact helped that relationship, that potentially tricky relationship between me and Tom. It's not perfect. Undoubtedly, there are moments when Tom will be thinking, I wish I could do this alone without Adam. But hopefully there are times when he feels the opposite as well.
I'll ask Tom this question in one of our future episodes. Adam, can we go back to your sabbatical? What impact did that 3-month sabbatical have on you and on the CEO transition?
I think it was fundamental. Like, it was really useful. I was tired. I was a bit hacked off with the job. I'd had enough. I just wasn't that enthusiastic about what I was doing. And taking the sabbatical really kind of reinvigorated me. And actually, we were trying to figure out how to make the sabbatical work. So we just decided to introduce it as a policy company-wide. So everyone gets 3 months off at their 5-year point, right? And at the time, like, I was the only person who was even vaguely close to doing 5 years. But we've just literally now we've got like 10 or more people that are just coming up to their 5-year point now. So we've got some people off at the moment. And we're about to get the first person back from their 3-month sabbatical. So I'm interested to see how they feel about it and whether they've been kind of holding out for that 3-month sabbatical and might want to go and do something else afterwards, or if it's going to reinvigorate them. That'll be really interesting to see. But for me, certainly it was a reinvigoration. And I didn't really realize I could do it either. The idea of asking for a 3-month sabbatical from the board didn't feel like something I could do. And it was Tom that suggested it. I am grateful for that. So I just completely switched off. I did a few holidays with some friends. I took some time out to look after my daughter. And I built a sauna as well. So that was, it was a few great projects there. I'm coming up to my 10th anniversary quite soon, so I guess I'll be going on another sabbatical.
And what was the impact on Tom? Because for him, it was the first chance to really run the company on his own without you being in the office.
I think it's a good question for Tom. From my perspective, like, the company didn't miss a beat, right? Nothing broke, and the business continued to grow. So it was, for me, certainly it was a very reassuring moment. And I guess for Tom as well, I imagine it would have given him the space to make decisions without consultation and take that step into becoming leader of the business.
So it sounds like it was a win-win solution. You got the rest that you needed after 5 years of running the business, and Tom had the chance to really step into the role and demonstrate that he's got the skill to run the business.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. And what advice do you have for founders who find themselves in a similar situation to you maybe a few years ago, running the company but sensing that for whatever reason you would like to step down one day?
First and foremost, like viewing a successful transition as an actual success in it is not a given, right? Looking back, like this has definitely been a successful transition. Like there's no doubt about it, and the business wouldn't be where it is today if we hadn't have made that transition. But that wasn't obvious at the time, and it wasn't necessarily obvious to the board or the investors, and it wasn't completely obvious to me either. And like I had a whole load of anxiety around my status and then no longer as required by the business. So, does that put me at risk of being fired? All sorts of other kind of emotions that go through your mind. Even though I knew that I wanted to maybe go and do something else entrepreneurial at some point, you're still grappling with those internal emotions, like is it the right thing to do or not? And this sense of kind of ultimate failure that you've not been able to transition to that next phase. Do you know Esther Perel, the relationship coach? Yeah, she has this phrase which talks about like during your life you'll be married to 5 different people. Sorry, during your life you'll have 5 different marriages, and if you're lucky, they'll all be the same person, right?
That's a great line.
It's a great line. I ruined the punchline there, but anyway, it's kind of the same with a business. Like during a business's life, it'll have 5 different leaders. If the business is lucky, they'll all be the same person. I mean, I don't know about the lucky bit, but certainly like it's completely different roles in a business, just like it is in a marriage. And so I'd sort of failed to make that transition. I didn't feel like I was the right person for that next stage. But that's okay. Like the business has done well. I think it's healthy to always be trying to do yourself out of a job. It's a healthy kind of mindset for an entrepreneur to have. So in that context, I think it should be something that you're always thinking about. And I also think it should be something that is totally not a taboo subject at board either. I think it's really tricky to know when the right time is. I know you go over some of this in your book. The self-awareness might be one thing, but actually there's probably no right answer either, and it'll be a kind of matter of degrees. So knowing when that moment is really tricky. And I think maybe it kind of comes down to fundamentally, if you're doing something that you're good at and you enjoy, then it's obvious, right? And at a certain point, like in the founder's journey, I think a lot of founders experience this sense of dread of coming into work in the morning, which is kind of normal to a certain extent, but maybe once it sort of exceeds a certain limit, that's the time when you probably need to start thinking about stepping away and finding someone else. And for me, a conversation with somebody about a pay rise, particularly if I don't think they're ready for the promotion or whatever, that sort of conversation can take all the energy that I have for the whole day. And I was having more and more of those conversations and dreading them. And I think that was what really made me realize that I needed some help on it, particularly on the kind of leadership and team coaching stuff.
And a similar question, again, with the benefit of hindsight, what advice do you have for investors who might have CEOs in their portfolios who are maybe considering moving on, but this has not reached the point of a board conversation yet?
There needs to be a sort of framework for discussing this stuff that's sort of like normal, like a boilerplate framework. And probably it's your book, Evgeny, but this should be a subject that's kind of raised on an annual basis, right? Every like high functioning company has performance reviews with its employees. We have them on a quarterly basis. And one of the questions in there is, what do you see in your future? What do you want to achieve over the next year? And it includes a conversation about whether people are kind of thinking of moving on or if they're seeing enough opportunities in their current role. That should be a standard part of a board discussion. It's probably what a good chairman does, to have that kind of regular and somewhat intimate discussion with a founder, where they feel they can openly share their thoughts and feelings about the situation, to normalize discussing it, and for it not to feel like it's anything of a failure. Like I don't feel like it's a failure in my case, but it'd be very easy to feel like it was a failure.
And if you think about the perspective of incoming CEOs, people like Tom, what advice do you have for them in terms of both identifying great opportunities and doing an excellent job as the CEO who takes over from the founder?
I feel like that could be a whole nother book, because if you're being recruited into a chief exec role, you're potentially entering a minefield, right? You don't necessarily know if the founder's actually going to step back, and the founder might not know themselves. So as the incoming CEO, setting some boundaries and expectations about who's going to do what, I think has got to be really important. For me personally, I feel like I've got no problem delegating to somebody who I can trust, but that trust is quite easily lost, and then I become a total micromanager, right? So I really trust Tom, and I think he's doing a great job. But if he'd come in and started messing everything up, I think I probably would have become a micromanager and looked to kind of replace him, right? So I think a lot of founders maybe don't even know how they're going to react when the new CEO comes in.
And Adam, what's next for you?
I think the question I'm always asking myself is, am I being useful, right? And at the moment that I stop being useful to the business, I'll go and look for something else. But for whatever reason, like at every kind of turn, there's been a new kind of mission for me to take on. And the next mission for us is, how do we get ourselves in the best position for our Series B fundraise? And that's going to involve much better understanding about what our international markets are like. It's going to involve setting out a clear and coherent strategy for M&A, also mainly in other territories as well. And there's some really interesting product work that I'm doing at the moment, particularly around this idea of a minimum heat guarantee. So providing some, like a bundle of heating in with people's rents, rather than having it as an add-on, which would eliminate a lot of the kind of fuel poverty issues that we have in the country, and a lot of disrepair stuff as well. So there's a few sort of special projects that I'm working on that I'm really excited about. But I think, post Series B, it'll depend on whether there's a mission for me or not. And I guess I'll be around for as long as I'm useful.
And there is a big lesson here. Even though you chose to step down as a founder CEO, you still have been doing really useful and interesting stuff for the last 4 years, and there is plenty to come.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I guess the debate for me personally is always like, do I want to operate as an entrepreneur in the business that I've built, or do I want to operate as an entrepreneur in a new entity? And it's a lot more comfortable operating as an entrepreneur in the entity that you've built, that's for sure. But potentially you have more latitude and freedom to operate in a new entity, because obviously if you have too much influence in your own company, you can end up sending the company in all sorts of different directions, just throwing grenades in. The ex-CEO founder needs to make sure they don't throw in too many grenades into the scaling machine, right?
Yep, not undermining the new chief executive, because after all, the company has a new CEO.
Totally.
And they are trusted to do an amazing job.
So you've got all these great new ideas, and that's great for innovation and keeping the company fresh. But there are also distractions at the same time. So there's a really interesting evaluation that has to go on there. And I think it's quite right that the founder, ex-chief exec, has constraints on them from just taking teams and going and doing new shit, because it's not always helpful.
But I really admire your self-awareness here, because you are seeing the same ideas from two completely different perspectives. It's a great new idea, innovation from one perspective, and the grenade, which can derail the business from a different perspective. And both can be true.
Both are true, absolutely. Both are true. Yeah.
Adam, thanks so much for this conversation. We covered lots of ground. It's been great having you on this podcast.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. I hope it's useful.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Adam. To wrap up this episode, I would like to highlight 3 points. The biggest one is Adam's self-awareness. He was very clear that At some point the company would grow beyond his skill set, and to continue growing and developing, it would benefit from someone like Tom to run the company going forward instead of him. Also, Adam's ability to know his strong and weak sides and communicate them to Tom enabled them to build a working relationship. Adam found a new role inside Switchee, formally reporting to Tom but not undermining the new CEO. This is a mistake that is so easy to make at this stage, when a founder CEO steps down, but then they still continue influencing the company, effectively getting in the way of the new leader. It's a lose-lose situation, and I'm so happy to see that Adam and Tom avoided it. The second thing I wanted to highlight is the sabbatical that Adam took just before he formally stepped down and promoted Tom. Taking 3 months off to rest, recover, and think about his next role inside Switchee allowed Adam to adjust to the change, and it allowed Tom, as the new CEO, to really demonstrate that he's got the skill to run the company without Adam being by his side. And finally, looking back, Adam regrets the way how he approached the very first conversation about CEO succession with the board. Some trust was eroded instead of being built. So looking back, Adam recommends that founders have regular conversations with their boards, most likely the chair of the board or the lead investor, about how they're doing, keeping their communication channel open instead of waiting until this conversation has to happen, which is usually a bit too late. In the next episode, I will speak to Tom, who took over from Adam, and so we'll see the same CEO transition, but from a different vantage point of a hired CEO. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Please don't forget to like and subscribe on the platform of your choice. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you soon.